We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These, of course, are stirring words from America's Declaration of Independence. They are the foundation of America's commitment to civil liberty. We accept them as a given now, but only because we know America's history. At the time, they presented a serious challenge to the founders of our nation. Could they create a governing structure that would match the high moral standards they had set for themselves? Their first attempt did not go well. The Articles of Confederation, the document that governed the country through the Revolutionary War and for a few years after, was such a miserable failure that many in England and America thought the new nation would soon collapse and return hat in hand to the mother country. The Americans' wariness of central power was understandable. Americans had fought and died to win freedom from an oppressive government. They weren't about to give away that hard-won freedom to a new government of their own making. The Articles allowed for no central authority to speak of. There was no chief executive, no effective way to impose or collect taxes, no provision for the national defense. All the power belonged to the individual states, and since the states disagreed on so many issues, almost nothing got done. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 brilliantly solved this problem. It installed a system of checks and balances within the federal government and divided power between the federal government and the states. It did so while still preserving basic civil liberties. Only a few years later, the founders would buttress these liberties with a Bill of Rights specifically protecting the free exercise of religion and the freedoms of speech, press, and assembly, among other rights in the Constitution. This step, too, was taken to bring the country closer to the vision of the Declaration. But here, of course, the founders faced a moral challenge. How could America espouse freedom and also permit slavery? Many of the founders, including Thomas Jefferson, the principal drafter of the Declaration, and George Washington, who presided at the Constitutional Convention, were slaveholders. This fact leads some people to condemn America's origins. The truth is that great men, and they were great, like Washington and Jefferson, violated their own ideals in holding slaves while proclaiming equality and liberty. They knew that slavery was an evil. Jefferson, speaking of slavery, declared that I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. Washington, upon his death, freed his slaves and made financial provision for them in his will. But we do not celebrate these and the other founders for their personal moral failures. We celebrate them for their unique moral achievements, for the revolution they bravely fought, and for the great principles they fought for, the equality of all human beings and a society rooted in liberty, the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution. To judge these documents as corrupt because imperfect men wrote them is, to say the least, foolish. It takes no account of historic context, namely, that virtually every society in history and everywhere on earth practiced slavery. It disregards the obvious truth that human beings are flawed creatures. And it elevates our current moral position to a level we haven't earned. Do we really think we are better and wiser than Washington, Franklin, Jefferson, Adams, Hamilton, Madison, and the other founders? The simple truth is that the Declaration, the Constitution, and Bill of Rights are among the most moral documents and principles ever conceived. They speak the truth about human nature, human rights, and human dignity. It was for the sake of, and indeed in the name of, the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution that Americans ended slavery, paying an enormous price in blood and treasure in a cataclysmic civil war. It was for the sake of, and in the name of these principles, that great, if also personally flawed leaders like Martin Luther King struggled to end the regime of segregation and Jim Crow that was the legacy of slavery. King, like Frederick Douglass before him, did not reject America's founding principles. Quite the opposite. The Constitution for these men was a promise of liberty and justice for all, a promise that they quite rightly insisted that our nation honor. America's problem is not its principles. They are just and good and true. When we as a people have gone wrong, our error has not been an excess of zeal for our nation's founding principles. Rather, it has been precisely because we have at times dishonored and failed to live up to them. But never have we had, and never will we have, anything to regret when we hold fast to the principles in our founding documents. I'm Robert George, Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program at Princeton University for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. To keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.